Hello and welcome back to Minimal Expectations. This is going to be the last episode of the first series of Minimal Expectations, which is going to conclude the story of the Romsey Horticultural Tramway. As I mentioned before, we moved out of our previous house because the landlord wanted to move back in, and so I had to take up the RHT, and we moved to the new location. That was 2 years ago at this point. It's taken me a very long time to get through all of the footage that I filmed at the RHT. I've published, I think, most of the videos that I wanted about the RHT at this point, and so now is the time to look at removing it from the garden. So we're about to travel back in time by 2 years or so. Unlike today, the weather was absolutely glorious on the day that I took the railway up. It should have been a grey, dismal day, to reflect the mood, but it was not. So the sun was shining as I took up the track panels of the railway. I'll discuss over the top of the footage a few of the things that I learnt from the RHT, things that I have built on in the meantime when building the new railway. And then at the end of the video I'll give you a sneak peek at the recent developments in the new estate, and a sort of a flavour of what's to come in Series 2. Hello and welcome back for one final time to the estate. Today is the 1st of June 2021, which means it's time to demolish the railway. The first reflection I have on the Romsey Horticultural Tramway is, first and foremost, that you can fit a railway into any space. The back garden really was quite small. Nonetheless, we managed to fit an interesting layout in. There was still lots of garden left to do vegetable growing in, and we had a huge amount of fun. The tramway really felt to me like a real railway. It had its own character that was largely built up by doing things on the cheap, but also not pretending to be a model of anything. On the subject of fitting a railway into a space, I really learnt here that having a line with lots of sidings is definitely the best way to get the most interesting railway out of the space. I would really recommend to anyone trying to fit a railway in that they try to avoid, squeezing a circuit in at all costs. You don't need to go round in a circle, and indeed, one of my railway mantras is that real railways don't go round in circles, with apologies to the Glasgow Underground. The railway was built in a way that had really low impact, and that's most obvious here when taking it apart. I didn't put any concrete down, so the compacted earthworks and the bark chippings as ballast, really it was fine. It was stable and it worked, and it was really cheap, and when it came to taking the railway up, there was nothing left once it was done. This was of course really important because it was a rented house, and I couldn't leave a whole load of concrete in the garden after we'd moved out.
On the subject of laying track, one of the things I learnt was that it's far better to get the track free of twists than to attempt to compensate for bad track work with suspension. No matter what I did with suspension on the wagons, they would always derail at some point on bad track, and that was just how it was. Luckily, with the bark chippings, it was easy to pack that underneath the sleepers very quick. Everything was so light, it was really easy to adjust for twists when they did occur. Another thing that I learnt from building this railway is that a 21-inch loading gauge is really too narrow. There's a funny bit in Lawrie's video, which I'll put a link to, where he mentions this. It was okay for me, but not for everyone. The other thing I found is that when things derailed, there wasn't really enough width to put your feet down and get off a wagon, so that you could then put it back on the rails and then get back on with any sort of dignity. And so for the next railway, I'm going to work to a 30-inch loading gauge, and this means that there's enough width for the footboards of a wagon, plus enough room to put feet down on each side. And that's important, I think, for safety. One other thing on the subject of track is it's the age-old story for railways, and that is that I needed to do more levelling. So there were too many gradients on the RHT, and if you look at the video I'll put a link to of the final open day we had, you can see that my steam engine Madge really did struggle with 3 adults getting up and down the gradients. So on that subject, we had a lot of fun with the railway in the short time that it was here. We had an open day, and somebody kindly made a video of that, so I'll put a link to that. Lawrie Rose visited, of Laurie's Mechanical Marvels. That was a lot of fun as well. I'll put a link to that down there. And then also the open day was when the Branch Line Society visited, and they enjoyed visiting every single one of the sidings and even being pushed in and out of the polytunnel. So that was all a huge amount of fun that we had in this tiny little back garden. Links to all those videos. On the subject of videos, one thing I've learnt is that no one really knows where to find these videos. Even if I search minimal gauge garden railway, which I think mine is a really good example of, nothing comes up. And I'm not really sure what to do about that. Certainly when I posted a 16mm video the other day, it got a lot more views than any of my minimal gauge efforts. So that was the RHT. A wonderful little railway in a wonderful little space in a garden that I very much enjoyed. Thinking about minimal gauge railways then, a lot of people would say that 5 inch is too narrow a gauge to do useful work. But actually this wasn't about passenger carrying, and so stability wasn't really an issue. And it was a really useful size for tubs of compost and weeding and this sort of thing. And I think that 7 1/4 might actually be too big and expensive, possibly even for this sort of light gardening purpose. So if we learn anything from the RHT, maybe it's that.
So that was that. The railway was taken up as it was always designed to be, and I moved everything to the new location and started to plan for the new railway. And the new location is bigger, it's slightly more complicated in terms of fitting a railway into the space, but there are lots and lots of advantages. Notably, I have a greenhouse now, which is fantastic. I've always wanted to have a greenhouse, and as you can see, I have been thoroughly enjoying growing my tomatoes and some cucumbers, and growing my seedlings in the spring in this space. So that's brilliant. So now let's have a quick little sneak peek at some of the projects that are coming up in Series 2. Of course, I'll be finishing off the tops wagons videos. You can see here I've got my big stack of 4 finished tops wagons there that live underneath my potting bench. There's the story of the bogie drop-sided wagon. That I started back at the old railway. I could include that in the next series if there's any interest in how that was constructed. Down this narrow passage I've had to build this great big long bridge construction, which includes an actual bridge. It's still not quite finished, and I had to build a bridge over the lawn, and I've had to construct these raised beds between which the railway track is laid. But at the point of recording I still haven't quite finished, so there's still some to go, particularly this leg down to the compost heaps. I hope you've enjoyed as much as I did the construction and development and use and eventually the decommissioning of my first horticultural tramway, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you my adventures in the new place. So until the next video, it's cheerio.